All right, so let's get started with today's webinar. Today we have a customer case study from Primetals Technologies on the topics of transparency and risk management for the whole Tier N supply chain. I'm joined by Eva Jung, who will present the customer case study, how they were able to bring transparency to the supply chain, but then also showing some examples of what they can now do with that, for instance, for the CSDDD. Before we get started with the case study and Eva's introduction, a few logistical points. The webinar today will be recorded. We will share the recording afterwards, as well as the slides with all registered participants. Also, there's the Q&A section that you can find in your Zoom webinar. You can open that up. You can already ask questions during the webinar. If they make sense, we will already pick them up. But we will also then at least get to them at the end in the third point of the agenda, the audience Q&A. Without any further ado, let me get started. I want to start with a short introduction, a few updates on Prewave before handing over to Eva. As many of you might be aware, 2 weeks ago, we had the second Prewave Day in Vienna, our annual customer event, where we brought together 300 attendees from 150 companies. We had 7 customer sessions presenting on stage were Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte, so Bosch Siemens home appliances on a Tier N diversification use case. We had Kercher presenting a use case on how they're achieving proactive resilience. Porsche Holding presented how they are integrating Prewave into their procurement systems. Endres and Hauser presented how they are solving 5 legislations at once with Prewave. We had a panel discussion on the CS3D, the LKSG, with very well-known participants, Markus Löning, Sebastian Rühns, Richard Wilhelm from BAFA, and Tim Geier from the SME Association in Germany. We presented an update on the action platform with customer stories who now successfully implemented audits and trainings and surveys with their suppliers through Prewave. And we ended the day with a session on deforestation. We also launched our new logo and new branding at the Prewave Day. So the new Prewave logo features the exclamation mark as our new symbol. We chose that one because it symbolizes both risk, warning, danger, but also action. So taking action. And I think at Prewave, we want to combine these 2 things, risk and action, highlighting risks, but also solving them. And the new tagline at Prewave is supply chain superintelligence, highlighting the AI part of Prewave, the founding story. As you know, we are a university spin-off coming from AI research, but also obviously AI is the future, and it's more and more clear that more and more capabilities and possibilities are available through AI. And this tagline is also our commitment that this is still, let's say, the core DNA of Prewave as a company and as a solution provider. But of course, AI is in and of itself not enough. AI only works if it empowers the human intelligence and if it enables actual value. And that's why I want to end this short introduction with the value pyramid that we presented at the Prewave Day. All of the sessions that were presented on stage relate to one of these levels of this pyramid. Basically, it shows the different solutions that we're offering today. It starts with the basic mandatory compliance. So these would be compliance solutions we're offering for the German Supply Chain Act, the CSDDD. Most companies start here because they have to. But then, of course, to enable the full value of risk management, you need to work yourself up this pyramid, integrating risk management into the broader procurement systems. This is the seamlessly integrated scorecard, making sure it's not just a small group of people that work with risk, but it's the entire procurement team. faster time to response. This is the alerting and how you can integrate alerting and incident response into your processes. Proactive resilience means moving from a reactive mode to a proactive mode of proactively investing in the security and stability of the supply chain, building up safety stock, adding second sources, diversifying supply chains. All of that it costs money, and we can here offer a kind of a very clear view on where to invest and where to prioritize. And then at the top of the pyramid is extending all of that for the complete supply chain. And this is today, Primetals is one of our longest standing customers. I think, Eva, we started working in 2018, 2019 together. And have since evolved, let's say, the project and the adoption of Prewave. Obviously, this is multi-tier risk management is very complex, but it also enables then a lot of other use cases. And we will show today what a transparency for the supply chain then enables also, again, for instance, efficient compliance, where the process for the CSDDD, for instance, becomes then quite efficient and easy because you have already built the transparency you need for that. With that short introduction, I'll hand it over to you, Eva. Please introduce yourself and Primetals and show us your case study.
Okay, thanks, Harald. Yeah, welcome, a warm welcome, fitting to today's weather, also from my side. So my name is Eva Jung. I'm in the global supply chain management team of Primetals Technologies since April 2019, so quite some time now. And among other things, I'm working on the topics of digitalization tools and also processes from a global point of view for our company. And yeah, today I would like to show you or tell you what we are doing now with Prewave together, and to just give you also a glimpse on what we are facing in terms of issues and how we want to solve this. So let's see if this works. Okay, thanks, Harald. Yeah, to just first introduce who is Primetals Technologies, what are we doing for all of those who are not knowing us. So we are in the plant engineering and construction in metal industry. So as you have seen on the picture before, that was a good picture of what we are delivering. So we are delivering steel plants for the steel industry. Just to give you also a short introduction of our history, because we have some history, and there was a lot of change in the past. So starting 1956, we were part of the FÖST, so the United Austrian Iron and Steel Plants. Then 1903, we was restructured to the so-called VATEC. 2005, also Siemens joined the boat, so there was a takeover, and only in 2015, the company Primetals Technologies was founded as we know it by the name today, and it was a joint venture between Siemens, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and other partners. And since 2020, our sole owner is Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. And as you see on the map on the right side, we are quite international company, so we have locations around the globe. And our headquarter is located in London, but we have a lot of locations, as you see here, and approximately 7,000 employees worldwide. Whereas Linz, where I'm also located, is one of the biggest locations with around 1,500 employees. From supply chain point of view, so I'm part of the global team, but we have 9 independent supply chain locations around the world. So we are somehow trying to steer all the global relevant topics, but nevertheless, the local supply chain organizations are quite independent at some point. Yeah, concerning our portfolio, so we really deliver for the entire process chain. So this is also shown on the right picture in the lower corner. So really from iron making, steel making, hot rolling, and so on. So we have a broad portfolio, and also the topic of green steel is quite a focus topic for us. So to deliver really green solution for our customers, and also digitalization. So in terms of a digital twin for plants to know where to do maintenance, this is also one of our core topics. But if you want to know more about the company, maybe it's also good to check our website, or if there are any specific questions, you know where to contact me. So, okay. Then jumping to the customer case study. So what we are doing with Prewave, we are working together within a project, the so-called CETA project. And I would like to give you an overview what we are doing in this project, why we are doing the project, and about the status quo. And when starting to think about risk and talking about this topic, I think this iceberg is quite a good picture to have in mind, because an iceberg is a big risk in the sea. And in terms of risks, it's good to know where they are located to avoid them. And for the iceberg, it's also interesting not to only know what is above the water. So this is what you obviously see, but it's also crucial to know what is below the water, because this could be an even bigger problem. So to make this iceberg visible, this is also one of the goals within the project. I think this is a good picture to keep in mind within the risk management. Yeah, so why did we even start the project, or what are the topics that keep us busy in supply chain management from market point of view, and also what is the framework from our company point of view that we are working in? So from market point of view, of course, the topic of globalization and intertwined supply chains make our life not easier, but more complex. So we have a lot of global supply chains where we have to take care about and to think about where are the risks located in those supply chains, and maybe one disruption at one part doesn't only have a direct impact, but also an indirect impact. So it's not that easy to isolate a disruption. Then also, of course, market uncertainties. So as we know, all these conflicts that are ongoing are putting up some new challenges for us. Then, of course, the sustainability and decarbonization. As mentioned, green steel is one of our focus topics. So also from supply chain point of view, we want to contribute to a sustainable future, of course. Yeah, in our time, digitalization is really on a big evolutionary step. So we have a lot of data available at any time we want. We can exchange information quite quickly. So also the topic of big data, how to handle all these data, how to get the best information out of all this data. I think this is still a challenge, not only for us, but also for other companies, that we are good in collecting data, or getting all the data we want, but to really make sense out of it is still a challenge. Yeah, laws and regulations. So as we will also touch today, the topic of CSDDD. Of course, these are also always new, nice surprises that we have to take care about. Is there a law if there is a law, we have to check, is this also relevant for us or not? What are the actions needed? Most of the time, those are really quick actions required, and so on. But for some, of course, we have longer time. So for CSDDD, luckily, we have some time still until this law is getting into force. Yeah, and the last topic is also the shortage of skilled workers. So to get good people is a challenge, and to then not overwhelm them with all these new tasks. So it seems like an employee in supply chain management, or a buyer, for example, doesn't only need to buy things, but has to be an IT expert, a law expert, and so on. So how to really use also tools to best support our people in the daily business. and to not make their lives more complicated. From a company point of view, what is our framework, or what is also defining how we can act from a company point of view is, as mentioned, our purchasing structure is decentral. So we have 9 locations where which are purchasing, and we have a really big supplier base with around 10,000 suppliers. Of course, these also include one-time vendors, vendors that are not actually used anymore, but still we have them in our database. So there's really a historically grown supplier base to manage. We are a project business company, so we don't have plants on stock which we deliver. So this is really, as soon as there is a customer order, we start with our purchasing and planning. And it's also not the case that a plant is always the same that you build. So it's really, customer-driven project. And also the last topic is the fluctuating of the capacity. So of course, it's not always a stable demand for steel plants. So there is also a peak or a low level season, as we have seen during COVID. So this is also somehow we are facing issues or problems when there is a peak in capacity to really meet the demands of the customer. Yeah, these are all topics that keep us busy. I'm sure we can talk even more about this, or there are more topics from your side. But we are always quite good in talking about problems or what keeps us busy and where we should take action. And yeah, coming back to the iceberg topic. So to really say, it's easy to know what is above the surface, but what is below, this is always quite a mystery. And all these issues, we should also see them as, of course, challenges, but also as chances. So to be able to be better and to improve ourselves. And that is why we also started the SITA project. SITA stands for Steel Industry, Transparency and Resilience. And within this project, we really want to try, or our goal is to establish a real-time risk monitoring together with Prewave for a selected number of suppliers. So we don't want to focus on our full supplier base. So we said, let's take a look at a part of it, because this is enough within the project. And then let's see where we can go ahead from this. The project is running 3 years, so we are coming now towards the end next March. And the funding the project is funded by the Federal Ministry of Climate Protection, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology. And yeah, as mentioned, our project partner is Prewave for this project. And on the right side, you see the steps that we are taking in this project. And just would like to just quickly go through what are the steps. So of course we started with the supplier selection and to make a concept. What suppliers do we really want to take a look at? Then we handed over these data to Prewave for the supply chain mapping. So Prewave loaded all the data to their platform and did the mapping for us. And as a next step, we did a validation of the data. So of course, it was of interest for us to take a look at the data in the tool, but also we were provided with an Excel sheet, an export of the data, and to also dig into this data within Excel to see what can we learn out of this data? Does it make sense for us? Are there any open questions and so on? And for all these 3 steps, we will present a little bit more in the next slides. And what's still to do is to set up the real-time monitoring. So this will be the next step to set up the criteria from our company perspective for the risk monitoring that are relevant for us. And to then think also about change management. So what do we need to change in our processes? When do we do the screening of a supplier? When do we do the mapping and so on. So what do we need to change in our processes, and how do we implement the Prewave tool in our daily business to make best use of it? And of course, the last part is the dissemination. So as today, talk about what we are doing and exchange experiences with other companies, and show you what we are doing. Yeah, in terms of risk management, I also want to give you now an overview what we are currently doing. So it's not that we are starting from scratch. So we have some risk management measures in place already, but of course we see room for improvement given all the developments in the last years. So what we are currently doing is before we place an order at a supplier, and it's really a big supplier, a big order will be placed, and it's also planned to have a long-time relationship with the supplier. Then we do an assessment at the premises of the supplier to really score the, for us, relevant criteria, and to get a rating of the supplier. And if, of course, the rating is poor, we either decide, okay, then we don't go for this supplier, or we discuss actions so the supplier can also improve its performance. During production or during the manufacturing, if it's required, for example, by the customer or due to critical quality requirements from our point of view, we also do inspections at the supplier's premises during production process. So to also visit the supplier during production to make sure that the equipment is manufactured based on our standards or on the standards required by the customer, and to avoid any unnice surprises at a later stage. Yeah, and after delivery, we have a so-called performance evaluation. So we also evaluate explicit purchase orders based on 6 criteria with different evaluation factors. And based on this, we get also a good scoring for the supplier performance after the PO. And in case there's also a poor rating, we take actions like blocking the supplier for further POs, or talking to the supplier and discussing required actions.
Eva, there's a question which I think fits quite well. Do you also consider risk in the pre-qualification and onboarding phases for suppliers? So let's say before they become actual suppliers?
Yes, so this is what we are doing in the assessment. So this is really then focusing on the supplier, but of course we also have screening of the supplier in place, or we take a look at the bank information. So there are also other factors we take into account for the onboarding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Where do we want to go? So this was the status quo, and where do we want to go in the future? So our goal is to really have a precise risk monitoring up to the tier 3 level in real time. So not only our suppliers, but also the sub-suppliers. And based on this funnel principle, to really first identify the suppliers. So which are the suppliers that we have to take a look at or take into account? So with this mapping, as we have done with the trial batch of suppliers. Then to see who are the risk suppliers. So taking also what we have already in place, adding it up with the functionalities of Prewave. So with this scoring, to really have a full picture, which are the risk suppliers, and based on this, go ahead and say which are the measures we have to take for the high-risk suppliers or critical suppliers to make sure that we avoid big risks and are compliant in future. But for this, we will also talk in the CSDDD part. Yeah, so within the CETA project, coming back to the Iceberg, so we aimed to make it more transparent, so to also see below the first surface. And in terms of TRN mapping, I think this is also a good comparison to see not only our suppliers, but also to get information about the sub-suppliers from our suppliers. And this is what we have done with Prewave. And I now hand over to Harald to talk about a little bit more about the approach.
Thanks, Eva. So when we engage in mapping of the supply chain and creating transparency for the complete supply chain, we call it multi-tier risk management. We also run a step-by-step process. The first step of this process is the scoping, where we select the types of categories, the types of suppliers, the groups of suppliers that we actually want to create the transparency for. Again, keep in mind that going into the complete supply chain creates a lot of data, and this requires us to have really a targeted approach, and the scoping is the first part of that. And we will explain in just a second how the scoping for Primetals looked like. The next step then is the mapping. This is where we actually then, for these scoped suppliers, we map the supply chain into the third, fourth tier or beyond. This is then an alignment with the customer, how far we want to go. Here we have really the goal of creating as much transparency as possible as a first step. But when we then go for analysis, so drawing conclusions based on the supply chain, for instance, for CSDDD risk assessment, exposure analysis, or other cases, we again narrow it down. Yeah? But first we go broad, and then we focus again the analysis, so that then the customer can take action where it matters and receive the benefits of that. So let's start with a quick look at the scoping. So again, the scoping is a decision of where do we actually want to focus and where do we want to map. And Eva, maybe you can quickly explain what the approach of Primetals in this case was and how you ended up at these 269 suppliers that you chose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first, for this project, we first started to define relevant so-called product groups from our point of view. So we have some company-defined product groups, which are derived from the so-called E-class. Not sure who in this call knows the E-class tree, but this is basically what we are using to also classify any material that we are buying. So this E-class is really an important character or attribute we have in our supply chain process. So we defined the relevant product group based on a defined time frame. So we said we took a look at the last 4 years. We said it should be project related, meaning really something delivered to our customer and nothing indirect. Also only external. Should also be external, meaning we have within MHI, not only we are a company, but MHI also has other companies in their group. So we are also purchasing at those companies. And as they are in the same group, we say, okay, the risk for those are quite low. So we also eliminate those. And yeah, as a next step, also we selected the suppliers within this group and applied the same criteria, and also said at the last step, which are the ones where we really place multiple times a PO, so not the one-time vendors, and where do we place the biggest purchasing order volume. So in terms of an ABC classification. And it was interesting to narrow it down from 7,000 from the start of this selection process to the 269, because especially the number of POs placed and the purchase order volume narrowed it down. And this is how we got to the 269.
Mm-hmm. And then we proceeded to map these 269 companies, meaning for these tier 1 suppliers, we are looking to build transparency into the deeper supply chain. And this we do by combining first public data. We use customs data, media data, and predictions to build transparency in the first place. Primetals can then also add their private information. So maybe in some cases, they know some of their tier 2 suppliers, they can add that. And then at the end of the day, we can also validate these supply chain maps with the suppliers themselves. But this is always the last step. But if we start out with the mapping results and how we approach this. So again, we started out with 269 tier 1 suppliers. Then as a first step, we work with customs data, around 30 countries in the world. These are countries including the US, India, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, Ukraine, Indonesia, Vietnam. These countries are publishing cross-border shipments, so both imports and exports. And with that data, you can get a first picture on the cross-border transactions that your suppliers might have. Again, this gives us a first picture, but not a complete picture. But it's the starting point. For the 269, we got in total a bit more than 21,000 tier 2 suppliers. Again, this is unfiltered. This is more or less the full transparency that we now have. The filtering then comes at a later point. But the first step is always to get a more or less complete transparency, and then we can focus. The next step that we do is to fill some of these holes in the customs data, because as you can see here, shipments between countries that are not reporting customs data publicly are not included in this data set. Shipment between France and Germany, for instance, would not be included. Shipment between China and Germany would not be included. So that certainly leaves holes, and also shipments within countries that are not declared in customs would be left out. So for that, to fill some of these holes in the data, we started using an AI-based approach of actually predicting supplier relations. How does this work? We have here an example of Infineon that has 3 fabs or factories, one in Dresden, one in Texas, and one in Malaysia. And in customs data, we see that both the Texas fab and the Dresden fab are sourcing very strongly from Amcor in Malaysia. So this is a Malaysian supplier. And the commodity that is being sourced is the right one for a company like Infineon. So they're sourcing semiconductor materials from Amcor. We don't see a relation in customs data from Amcor in Malaysia to Infineon in Malaysia, because it's a shipment within the country. There is no customs declaration. But if they are supplying 15,000 kilometers to Texas and 9,500 kilometers to Dresden, then there's a high likelihood that they will supply the Infineon factory in Malaysia, which is just 300 kilometers apart. And that is then a prediction that is added to the system with a certain percentage probability. And that is then included, and that in this case brought us 1,500 additional relationships that we could find. But that's not the end of it. We then continue with media data. So supplier-customer relationships are not just visible in trade data, such as customs data, but of course they are also visible in annual reports, in press releases, on websites. Many suppliers name their reference customers. All of that is public information that also shows a supplier-customer relationship. And we have invested very heavily to apply our AI-based approach of media alerting to also find these relationships in media data. Today, for Primetals, these brought us 205 additional suppliers based on media data. But I also want to show the, let's say, general progress that we're making, because we are quite heavily investing and building up this data set currently. So this is not from Primetals data, but this is Prewave data as a whole. We have 1.3 million tier 1 suppliers in the system, and we have 1 million tier 2 suppliers we identified through customs data for these 1.3 million tier 1 suppliers. And today we have 250,000 additional suppliers identified through media data. But these are 250,000 per month because we started rolling this out last month. And this data set is now significantly increasing over time. And we expect soon, so in a few months, this to be the largest part of the transparency we can create for our customers. The predictions on the whole are currently 2 million predictions that we have in a database. So you can see that we are significantly going beyond the customs data with these approaches. For Primetals, these are not, again, a bit more than 21,000 suppliers. Why do these numbers not add up? Because a supplier we find in customs data is then often also found in media data or also included in the prediction. So it's basically confirming with different sources supplier relationship. On the tier 3, of course, the numbers then increase significantly. Much more customs data, but also a lot more predictions, a lot more media data. And this gives us now a broad transparency that we can then use, and that Eva will then also demonstrate how is now Primetals using this data internally, for instance, for CSDDD risk assessment. Now, last point from my side is how good is now this transparency? This is always a question. So we are using here public data to map supply chains. To which extent does this cover the reality? And here we recently engaged in a benchmarking with some selected customers of ours. And what we did was we compared the suppliers that we have received from these customers. So for instance, a customer gave us 500 of their tier 1 suppliers. And then we checked how many of those can we confirm using public data. And we found that we have, again, higher coverage for certain industries than others. So if these were suppliers from the plastics and rubber industry, we have on average a higher transparency than for customers from, for instance, the machinery and equipment industry. But especially we see that on the x-axis, this is the spend, the annual purchase volume that our customer had with that supplier. So basically for very large suppliers with 1 million or even more than 10 million in annual purchase volume, the mapping validation rate or the coverage that we can achieve goes from 30 to 60%, depending on the industry. And that is just using public data. For very small suppliers that have a purchase volume of 1,000 euros or less, the coverage is more around 10%. Because for these small suppliers, there is not a lot of media data, not a lot of often also customs data. But again, I think we also want to bring transparency to the largest suppliers and not the suppliers with a very small purchase volume. And with that, now looking at the other steps, I want to hand it back to you, Eva.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Harald. Yeah. So, of course, we also took a deep look to the data that Prewave was providing. So to also, we also asked ourselves the question, how good is the coverage and what do we learn now out of this data? And just try to summarize, the most important findings and what we are doing with these findings. So for us, as a first thing, clustering the suppliers, so slicing down the elephant or slicing down the iceberg was really important from our point of view, because as Harald has provided the numbers, this is a really high number that was already found for only this limited number of suppliers we provided. And it was hard to dig through those data already. So we said it's really good that we started with a small batch to get to know the results, get to know the tool and so on. So to really move forward from this and to see where we can go from the small batch. What was also a good learning for us as a company, of course, the presentation and comprehensibility of data. So to show the data is within an Excel file maybe quite complicated, but with a tool, so with the tool of Prewave, you have a really nice overview of the supplier. You can show the tier 3 tree within the tool, and you don't have to scroll through an Excel file. And we also discussed with our colleagues, and they also said, yeah, if you provide me an Excel sheet, I will not look at it, but if it's a really nice tool and a convenient tool, then of course also the user acceptance is higher. So we also said, of course, these data sheets, these Excel files and all these numbers are important from a management point of view, or to discuss strategy and what to do with this data. But in terms of the end user, it's also important to have a tool where the data are nicely shown. What was also an interesting result in terms of the mapping is the interaction we have seen, or where we found our focus suppliers on the different tiers. So it was very interesting that especially on tier 3, you find a lot of suppliers again. So which also leads to the conclusion that even so, if we work with a supplier directly, this supplier is also indirectly working with another supplier. So if there is an issue at this specific supplier, we also have to think about, okay, which other suppliers are affected by a disruption. And of course, if there is an issue, not every company is forthcoming and telling you about this. So it's also good to know where this disruption is impacting in your supply chain. So this was also a good learning for us with this supply chain mapping. The next point is clean and structured data is a big starting point. I think, or maybe it's sometimes the assumption that you just provide data and an AI tool is making sense out of it. But we have seen that, we have a different clustering for our product groups, for example. So we are using E-class, and Prewave is using the customs tariffs numbers for the mapping. So we had to do a mapping table from E-class to customs tariffs numbers, which of course also leads to possible mistakes because there is no standard. So we had to do this on our own. You have to update this if there are changes. So you also have to update this in the tool and so on. So this was really, a topic where we said, okay, clean and structured data are an important starting point, and maybe also we have to think about what data do we really need in our supply chain process and how can we improve this. And the last part is also to really critically look at the results and also reduce the so-called noise, because as Harald showed, there are a lot of numbers of suppliers found, and we also thought, okay, it's interesting to know which suppliers are working with our suppliers, but maybe we need to narrow it down a little bit more. So we also did another grouping of those suppliers, of those sub-suppliers, to make sure to really reduce or to eliminate those suppliers where we say, okay, it's good to know that our supplier is working with those, but these are not really part of our supply chain. So they are not directly delivering to us. So let's move them out of the picture. And we also did a comparison with selected suppliers. So some suppliers already deliver to us their sub-supplier list, because if it's really a important part of a plant or a really important supplier, or the customer is requiring a sub-supplier list for a certain equipment, we also already get some sub-suppliers lists, and there we also made a comparison. And this is somehow referring to the fact that Harald stated those were suppliers in Europe who were also buying, or the sub-suppliers were also located in Europe. So meaning those data, those trade data are not in the web. So also Prewave cannot detect those. And this also was a learning for us that the mapping with the Prewave tool is a good start and an important start. But of course, if we want to have full coverage, or we want to have a full picture of the supply chain, it's also required to ask either our suppliers to also input their suppliers in the tool, or to use the sub-supplier lists we get to enrich the data in the Prewave tool. Yeah, and to maybe sum it up as a conclusion for the last steps or the steps we have currently taken is that digital tools and artificial intelligence, so like Prewave tool, are an essential part of solving the problem. So really making the Iceberg transparent and getting bigger transparency or starting with transparency in the supply chain, but they are not the solution of the problem itself. So the resilience to take the actions to get full coverage or to also close the gaps that a tool cannot close. It's also required to take action from a company point of view. So this was basically, to summarize the conclusio for the last steps we have done. And now I would also like to take a look at what are the next steps. So what are the next steps we are doing in the project? And next part is really setting up the real-time risk monitoring. And there we are following the approach to take, or Prewave is providing a lot of risk categories, which I show on the next slide, which you can monitor within the tool. And we said we start with analyzing our Primetals Technologies relevant guidelines and rules and regulations and contractual documents to really focus on those risk criteria which are mentioned in the documents. So for example, in our code of conduct, the topic of modern slavery is quite crucial. So also, if there is any modern slavery at a supplier, this is really a highly critical issue and should be also popping up immediately when in terms of risk monitoring. Yeah, after analyzing the documents, we will define which risk categories are relevant and at what level, also taking CSDDD into account a little bit in the back of the head. Then doing the rating, so discussing within supply chain management, how do we then rate the different risk categories? And as a last step to then also discuss again with the experts of the different departments in our company, so with compliance, legal, some buyers or EH&S to really have a full common understanding of what risks we should monitor to get to a so-called Primetal specific perspective, which we can implement in the Prewave tool to really get the risk monitoring we need based on our company needs. Yeah, as mentioned, these are the risk factors that are available by Prewave, so ranging from political unrest, natural disaster topics, governance risks, and so on. There is a lot available, so it's quite a lot you can also adapt to your company's needs. Of course, Prewave also offers standard perspectives. But we said, okay, none of those standard perspectives are really fitting to our needs, and we would like to create an own perspective. So we started to really define which are the relevant ones. And as you see here in this picture, we tried to see which ones are the critical ones, also based on what we have in our contractual documents and so on, which ones are high, and where we say medium, it's of course important, but might not lead to an immediate necessary action. Or we also excluded some topics, so like consumer unrest, as we are in the B2B area, we said this is not so crucial for us. So we were able to exclude this, for example. Yeah, but these are the first steps we're doing. And still some things to do to get to the final perspective and then to set it up in the Prewave system. Good. Before jumping to the next topic, Harald, any questions we should answer for the last part? You're muted.
Okay. That were immediately relevant. I think we can leave them for the end. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good. Yeah, as a next part, we also want to give you a glimpse of our CSDDD scoping trial together with Prewave. Because, yeah, why it's important for us, I think this slide provided by Prewave is a good compass for companies to yeah, check, should I think about this law or not? So for example, the Supply Chain Act, the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, we knew, okay, this is not relevant for us, so we are not in the scope of this law. But CSDDD will impact us either if it's via our yeah, Primetals, via Primetals Technologies, or even via MHI. So this topic of who is the ultimate parent company, in our case, this is still an open question for us, for example. Who is then really the ultimate parent company who has to do the reporting? Yeah, but based on the criteria, we are aware that this law will also impact us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, if I can quickly outline our approach, but also the requirements of the CSDDD from a due diligence perspective, especially as it applies to the risk assessment. The CSDDD, again, first of all, has a risk-based approach, meaning it does not require you to look at all suppliers. It requires you to prioritize certain risk areas and then to bring transparency into these risk areas. And this part is called scoping. Yeah, and this is, you saw it also earlier. Primetals also did a first internal scoping for the CETA project, but also now for the CSDDD. Again, we start with a scoping exercise, trying to focus in on these types of, these are typically categories, countries of sourcing, so not individual suppliers, but broader areas where there is elevated risk for the topics that the CSDDD covers, so human rights and environmental risks. And this is basically a two-step approach. First, we scope broadly which of our tier one suppliers do we move into scope, and which of our supply chain, which parts or areas of our supply chain do we prioritize for an in-depth assessment. And only for those areas, we then look at individual suppliers. This is a clear difference from the German Supply Chain Act, which more or less requires companies to look at all of their tier one suppliers individually. We have companies that send us 30, 40, 50,000 suppliers. We need to check all of them individually. This is not required for the CSDDD. You can start with a narrower scope by doing this first broad-based scoping. And only then you move into the later stages. And maybe handing it back to you, Eva. How did the scoping and the CSDDD project now proceed?
Okay, going to the next slide. Yeah. So what is the status quo concerning CSDDD at our company? So we did the first scoping trial together with Prewave. So yeah, to how to explain. So we also, of course, want to see how does it work? How do you? How is Prewave doing this? How would the process look like if we do the CSDDD reporting within Prewave? So to really put on the shoes and just explore a little bit the tool. So this is what we did with the first scoping trial, where Harald will present the results. And of course, internally, we are still or starting to discuss how can we again define a scoping for the suppliers. So because we have a high number of suppliers, how can we limit this? So for example, from our point of view, it doesn't make sense to include suppliers that have a deletion flag in our system. And there are also other criteria like the different areas of suppliers, so direct, indirect material, consulting. This is nothing directly associated to what we deliver to our customers and so on. So to also have this, what is part of the supply chain view in mind, what are really the relevant suppliers. Then also this impact-driven scoping approach to also think about which industry should be priority or which area of suppliers should we focus on. And yeah, to always have back in mind, where can we prevent risk? Where is it possible to prevent risk, and where should we really take action? So of course, this is nothing we have to implement now. So this last topic, but still have in mind when starting the process, where is the risk most, where can we expect the highest risk, and what actions can we really take? So we are, I would say, basically at a beginning phase of also thinking about how to do the scoping. And now handing over to Harald, what came out of the first trial?
So zooming in a bit further in how we now approached the risk assessment and this first CSDDD trial for Primetals. And first of all, I want to again address how the CSDDD works from a fundamental standpoint. Yeah, the CSDDD is a best effort due diligence legislation. The CSDDD does not set the standard of having zero risk and full transparency, because that is a standard that, first of all, cannot be achieved. The CSDDD rather sets the standard that companies establish certain processes and risk management, a due diligence system that prioritizes a risk assessment that works on a risk-based approach. That is a best effort application, meaning it's always possible that some risks happen that you have not foreseen, but you need a process to then address those risks as you learn about them. And you also need a proactive approach of looking at the risk areas of your supply chain and taking measures to mitigate those risks. Yeah? And this is precisely the step-by-step approach that we implement with our customers. So again, first, we proceed with the scoping. And the scoping, as I mentioned earlier, is a selection of the broad areas of the tier one supply base, but also the supply chain that we want to take into focus. For that, we have a dedicated dashboard within Prewave. You can see here, this is a screenshot of the system. This is a step-by-step process where we first scope, then we look at individual suppliers, and then we have the measure and action planning and the reporting following after that. The scoping is here a dashboard where we look at combinations of countries and categories. Yeah, we have a country industry, a country commodity based scoping. In this particular case, for instance, by looking, we are sorting here by the most risky combinations. For instance, machinery suppliers in Taiwan would be considered generally high risk. So these suppliers are moved into scope. Similarly, suppliers in the metals industry in China would be considered generally high risk and moved into scope. And this is then, you can see here, the blue ones or the selected ones are here towards the risk areas. On the bottom hand, you would have financial services suppliers in Austria. Yeah, so neither a particular risk industry for a risky supply chain, nor a particular risk country for human rights and environmental risks. Those would be moved out of scope, meaning we would not even look at these suppliers in detail. But for these in-scoped combinations of countries and categories or countries and commodities, we then take a deeper look in the risk assessment, and we proceed then with the scoping and the mapping. So for these scoped areas, we then run the mapping approach. Again, there's also some questions on this topic. We initiate the mapping with public data, but of course, for these risk areas, we also recommend eventually to validate these data points with your suppliers, particularly if you then identify risk suppliers. This would be the next step. We then apply a scoring to all of these, obviously tier one suppliers, but also tier N suppliers that we identify. So the risk assessment approach that we have at Prewave to score a supplier based on country and sector risk, based on media screenings, based on availability of certificates, policies, maturities. All of that is applied to both tier 1 and tier N suppliers. And we then recommend really, if you identify a high risk supplier, that we also try to validate that, and we actually have a functionality for that as well. But then we proceed with the scoring, with the prioritization of these suppliers, and then eventually with the measures. How did this look like now for Primetals? I will give a short summary here. So from the scoping, the risk areas we identified from 474 total suppliers that we considered on the whole. We scoped 78 tier 1 suppliers and 163 tier N suppliers that we then prioritized for the deeper assessment. Out of those, we identified 15 risk suppliers on the tier 1 level and 26 risk suppliers on the tier N level. Primetals then already initiated some measures for the high-risk suppliers. For the tier N suppliers, these measures are still planned and in progress. Again, this was just the first trial, but we can see here already that kind of the focusing and the funneling on the risk suppliers really works to reduce the complexity and focus from a larger number of suppliers on those that are really at risk. And this is precisely the risk-based approach that the CSDDD wants us to follow. And to end with one example, so out of this exercise of looking at the suppliers from a CSDDD risk perspective, there was one supplier we prioritized that is a supplier in the construction industry in Mexico. And this supplier has a higher risk in the areas of health and safety and labor rights. First of all, because it's generally a risk country and industry for these risk areas, but also because the supplier actually had a history of having problems in these areas, which we surfaced through the screening approach. So there was a recent fatal accident that happened at one of the construction sites of that supplier, and they had a worker protest some time ago, and that where the workers even blockaded some of the roads due to labor issues. So here we can see that, let's say, the approach works. It brings transparency and it gives a basis then for companies to follow up with these risks. Do you want to add anything, Eva, to the approach?
No, I think you summarized it quite well. Thanks.
All right, then I think we can move to the audience questions. There were actually quite a few. Let me maybe look through some of the questions here. Question for Prewave platform. For the tier N suppliers, do you offer risk assessment score for all of them, or do you have it only for the tier 1 suppliers? No, we have the scoring also for the tier N suppliers, because again, the scoring we do works first of all based on public data. So we can also score the part of the iceberg which is below the surface. Yeah, this is actually quite an important point, because if you work traditionally more on a, let's say, questionnaire-based approach, you can, of course, reach out to your tier 1 suppliers, but how do you then assess your tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers based on questionnaires? It's not really possible. You don't even know who to send it to. So that's why the public data approach also for scoring enables, let's say, the assessment for the whole supply chain. Let me see if maybe Eva, I saw a question for you. Question to Primetals. Have you considered contingent labor? So they're talking about temporary labor in factories in your risk assessment. And do you treat this more on the policy level, or do you track numbers for individual workers? Very specific question.
Oh, can you repeat can you repeat the question?
Are you considering, as part of the risks you look at, also the temporary labor that you have in your factories, if you have any? So from kind of temporary labor agencies. Sometimes this can be a problem or a risk area for companies.
Okay. Now we have limited factories on our own, but of course we also ask our suppliers, how many workers do you have? Which of those are in the different areas? So this is also what we assess. Of course, we also work with leasing companies. So this could also be relevant to keep track of in terms of risk monitoring.
Mm-hmm. There's one or a few questions which can be summarized as, with these learnings now of having some risk suppliers in the tier 1 and the tier N, what are some actions that you're now considering to work with these suppliers? Are you reaching out to them, auditing them? Is there anything that you have already planned as measures for these suppliers?
Yeah, for example, if we really saw, or if based on the tool, there was really a high alert, then of course we thought about, like announcing an earlier audit than planned. Maybe it was planned in the next year, but to say, okay, we have the capacity now to do an audit, so we want to visit you earlier. So this could be an immediate action. Also, if this is a supplier that a buyer has a good relationship with, to also ask the supplier, what is the situation at your factory? And I think this was not within the SITA project, but one former test we have done with a supplier, which was quite new. And there we had the alert from Prewave that there was a fatality at the location, at the premises of the supplier. And actually, there was somebody there already currently at the same time expediting. So, at the supplier's base, and there was no information about this from our own employee. So of course we were then alerted and immediately contacted the supplier. What is the situation, and is our colleague still well, or so to really then immediately contact the supplier.
There's one question. Have you had any experience? Because one of the attendees here says that they have basically a requirement in their contract with the suppliers that their suppliers should name the sub-suppliers to them. Do you have any experience of approaching your tier 1 suppliers and kind of asking them to share suppliers with you? How were those experiences, if you can share them?
Yeah, so for really crucial equipment, we already get sub-suppliers lists. And also in terms of the SITA project, we approached some suppliers where we know they are important, and to ask them to provide again a sub-suppliers list. And what was quite surprising for us is that they seem to be open, so especially European suppliers, and that they are aware of all the laws and regulations coming up, and that transparency is an important topic. So from my point of view, maybe there is now more, or suppliers are more open to provide their data. And I think this is also learning from the project for our onboarding process, maybe to, when start working with the supplier, to already ask the supplier to provide a sub-supplier list, or even add those suppliers in the Prewave tool, so that already from the start we know with whom we are working.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, yeah. And this is also again what we recommend is that obviously for critical suppliers, engaging with them makes a lot of sense. But this is of course also something that costs resources, and that to engage with that supplier takes time, and there is limited time in the procurement department, as we know. That's why kind of combining this approach with public data, where we can also approach the supplier already with a list of suppliers we have found publicly, that can speed up the process. And then obviously we validate for certain risk suppliers or risk areas or critical suppliers. And also it's good to have these data points to overlay on top of each other. Yeah, if I ask my supplier and they send me back 10 sub-suppliers, but through the public data approach, I find 50 additional ones. That's also something that we can look at and say, okay, have you really shared everything with us? check and recheck, I think, is always good, especially in due diligence. So yeah, I think, but also, as I said, it's important to be efficient. And I think, again, that's also the CSDDD. It doesn't require full transparency, and it also understands that there cannot be full transparency at any given point, but it's more of a process of how are we achieving this transparency, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so we are also not asking every supplier because, as you mentioned, efficiency, we have a lot of one-time suppliers or really small suppliers, and there we also don't see the current need, or yeah, to again coming back to slicing down the elephant, where do you start, which are the important ones, and then going step by step.
Yeah, maybe last point I can address. There's a few questions. Question to Prewave: can one map some risk raw materials like rubber, palm oil, cellulose for certain areas? Yes, you can. So we can focus the mapping on some categories. We can even do bottom-up mappings. For instance, we have a set of risky suppliers in a certain region, and then we can find where do they appear in your supply chain. Yeah? There's another question around Xinjiang area in China. This is a case for that, yeah, where, for instance, there's some sanction lists from the US government. We can help you identify whether any of these sanctioned companies appear in your supply chain. So these are then the types of analyses that we can provide our customers. And yeah, again, to kind of finish up, because we're already 15 minutes, 13 minutes over time, I would like to thank you, Eva, for sharing your case study. There were already, I think you cannot see the Q&A, there were very nice comments thanking us for the valuable content. Thank you for the nice words. We will share the slides and the recording with you afterwards. And yeah, Eva, again, thank you. And with that, I also say, yeah, good afternoon to everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.